Sophie stands frozen at her sister Jane's lavish wedding reception as her father makes a shocking announcement to all the guests: we're selling the family company. Jane gets everything she deserves, but Sophie gets nothing. Awkward silence fills the room until Sophie laughs, drawing confused stares. Her father proudly announces the buyer is Titan Holdings for $38 million. Sophie calmly stands, raises her glass, and reveals, "I am Titan Holdings." The room freezes in shock as father and daughter lock eyes across the crowded reception hall. I always knew I was the daughter my father never wanted. Growing up in the Mason family meant living with that reality every day of my life. My father, Gregory Mason, built Mason Electronics from nothing but determination and a small loan. By the time I was 10, the company had become a respected manufacturer of custom circuit boards for medical devices. While other kids spent weekends at the mall or playing sports, I begged to go to the office with Dad. "Why do you want to waste your Saturday looking at boring paperwork?" he'd ask, his confusion genuine. But to me, those circuit boards were like intricate puzzles, each one solving a different problem. I loved watching the engineers test new designs and hearing the sales team discuss upcoming contracts. My sister Jane, 3 years younger, never showed the slightest interest. While I was reading business magazines at 14, Jane was flipping through fashion catalogs and planning her social calendar. I didn't fault her for it. We all have different passions. But I noticed how Dad's eyes lit up when Jane performed in school plays or won beauty pageants. "That's my girl," he'd say, beaming with pride. I never heard those words directed at me. After high school, I pursued a business degree, then an MBA from Stanford. Dad didn't attend my graduation. "Someone has to keep the company running," he explained over the phone. Jane's college graduation the following year warranted shutting down production for a day so all employees could attend a celebration party. I spent 8 years building my career at other tech companies, working 60-hour weeks and climbing the corporate ladder. Each promotion felt like another credential that might finally convince my father I was worthy of joining Mason Electronics as more than just a courtesy hire. I became an operations specialist, streamlining inefficient systems and turning struggling departments into profitable ones. 3 different tech startups tried to recruit me as their COO. My relationship with Jane remained complicated but intact. We spoke weekly, sharing surface-level updates about our lives. I genuinely loved her despite the painful awareness of our unequal standing in Dad's eyes. When Jane called to announce her engagement to Andrew Williams, son of prominent real estate developer Thomas Williams, I felt sincere happiness for her mixed with the familiar sting of knowing this would be another milestone Dad would celebrate with unbridled enthusiasm. "You have to be my maid of honor," Jane insisted. "It wouldn't be right without you standing beside me." I agreed, hoping that the wedding might provide an opportunity to reconnect with Dad on new terms. At 32, with a successful career and industry recognition, surely he would finally see my potential value to Mason Electronics. Maybe he'd even consider my long-held dream of eventually taking over leadership of the company. The week before the wedding, I arrived in my hometown feeling cautiously optimistic. Dad had agreed to meet for dinner to catch up, which seemed like progress. Over appetizers, he actually asked detailed questions about my current role managing supply chain logistics for a major tech firm. For once, he seemed impressed by my answers. "You've done well for yourself," he acknowledged, and something warm unfurled in my chest. Always were stubborn about doing things your own way. The rehearsal dinner the following evening was held at the country club, where Dad had been a member for 20 years. After the formal practice run, guests mingled over cocktails. I was headed to the restroom when I overheard Dad's voice from a partly open door. "The timing works perfectly," he was saying to someone. "With the wedding, everyone will be too distracted to ask questions about the sale." "What about," Sophie asked, a voice I recognized as belonging to Harold Winters, Dad's longtime business partner. "She's always been keen on the company." Dad laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive. "It's time to cut Sophie out completely. She had her chance. The company's going to someone who deserves it." I froze, my hand gripping the wall for support. All my hopes of reconciliation and professional recognition crumbled in an instant. Dad wasn't just continuing to overlook me. He was actively planning to ensure I would have no place in the company's future. And he was going to do it at Jane's wedding when everyone we knew would be watching. That night, I barely slept. My father's words echoed in my mind on endless repeat: "Cut Sophie out completely." The casual cruelty staggered me even after years of disappointment. By morning, grief had hardened into resolve. This betrayal wasn't just about me, it was about Mason Electronics itself, the company I loved despite everything. 3 years earlier, I had returned home determined to prove myself to my father. Armed with market research and financial projections, I presented a comprehensive plan to modernize Mason Electronics. Our circuit boards were still excellent, but the company had fallen behind in developing the software interfaces clients increasingly demanded. My proposal included a phased investment in software engineering talent and a strategic pivot toward integrated hardware-software solutions. "We're a hardware company," Dad had dismissed, barely glancing at my carefully prepared materials. "Always have been, always will be. That software nonsense is just a trend." "The market is changing, Dad," I insisted. "If we don't adapt, we'll be left behind." "I've been running this company for 30 years, he snapped. "I don't need my daughter telling me how to do my job." I tried again 6 months later after landing a major client for my employer, specifically because of our integrated approach. Dad's response was even more cutting. "Maybe you should focus on finding a husband instead of trying to play businessman," he suggested during a family dinner. "Your sister's got the right idea. The Williams family has real money, not this small-town business stuff." That was the night I decided to leave Mason Electronics behind, at least openly. But privately, I made a different choice. I liquidated my savings and investments, took out loans against my condo, and founded Titan Holdings under the pseudonym Samantha Bennett. My years of industry connections helped me assemble a team of talented engineers and developers. We began by creating the very products Mason Electronics had refused to consider, then expanded into strategic acquisitions of promising startups. No one knew Samantha Bennett was actually Sophie Mason. I conducted most business remotely or through trusted representatives. For in-person meetings, I used light makeup and hairstyling changes that were subtle enough to be professional but sufficient to avoid recognition by casual acquaintances. 2 years of 80-hour work weeks later, Titan Holdings was valued at $22 million. We had successfully developed integrated circuit software systems that were outselling traditional hardware-only options across the medical device industry. That's when I began hearing rumors about Mason Electronics struggling financially. My father had refused to innovate, and the market had moved on without him. Major clients were switching to competitors offering more modern solutions. I had my finance team analyze publicly available information about Mason Electronics. The picture wasn't pretty. "They're about 18 months from insolvency unless they change course dramatically," my CFO reported. The news should have brought satisfaction, vindication that I'd been right all along. Instead, I felt a complicated mixture of sadness and determination. Mason Electronics employed over 70 people in my hometown. My father might be a terrible parent, but those employees didn't deserve to lose their livelihoods. I made the decision to acquire Mason Electronics through Titan Holdings. My team put together a fair offer that would keep the company operational while allowing for necessary modernization. I hired Max Thompson, a brilliant corporate lawyer I'd known since business school, to handle the negotiations anonymously. "Your father has no idea it's you behind this?" Max asked when I finally revealed my connection. "None," I confirmed, "and he can't find out until I'm ready. He'd torpedo the deal out of pride, even if it meant destroying the company." Max nodded, understanding the stakes. "We'll keep your name out of it. Everything will go through shell companies and proxies." The initial offer was rejected as I expected. My father had too much ego to sell at the first opportunity. We increased our bid gradually over 6 months, watching as Mason Electronics' financial position weakened. Finally, 2 weeks before Jane's wedding, Dad agreed to sell to Titan Holdings for $38 million, far more than the company was actually worth, but I was willing to pay the premium to ensure control. The morning of Jane's wedding arrived with a perfect blue sky. I was applying mascara in my hotel room when a knock came at the door. Jane stood in the hallway, already in her bridal makeup, but still wearing a hotel robe. "Can we talk?" she asked, her expression unusually serious. I let her in, expecting pre-wedding jitters or last-minute maid of honor instructions. Instead, she perched on the edge of the bed and fixed me with a calculating stare. "I know about Titan Holdings," she said flatly. "I know it's you." My carefully applied mascara wand froze midair. "What are you talking about?" "Please, Sophie. I'm not as clueless as you and Dad think. I saw the paperwork in his office last week. Then I did some digging about this mysterious Samantha Bennett." She smiled thinly. You used Mom's maiden name. Not exactly CIA-level subterfuge. My mind raced, calculating implications and damage control scenarios. How much do you know? Enough. Jane leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're buying Dad's company for $38 million. I want half. Half, Jane, that's not how acquisitions work. The money goes to the current owner's dad and his partners. She laughed. I don't care about the technical details. You're getting the company you've always wanted. I deserve compensation for being the good daughter all these years while you ran off to play big shot executive. Jane, this isn't personal. It's business. Everything in this family is personal, Sophie. Her eyes narrowed. Give me half of whatever you get from Dad, or I'll tell him everything before the ceremony. We both know he'd rather burn the company to the ground than sell it to you. With that ultimatum hanging in the air, she smoothed her robe and headed for the door. Think it over, sis, she called over her shoulder. You have until the reception to decide. The door closed behind her, leaving me staring at my reflection, the systematic betrayal by my family now complete. The wedding ceremony was held in St. Mark's Cathedral, the same church where our parents had married 35 years earlier. I sat in the third pew, watching Jane glide down the aisle on Dad's arm, her designer gown trailing behind her like a cloud. She was radiant, every inch the perfect bride. Dad beamed with unmistakable pride, his silver hair catching the light from the stained glass windows. I felt a familiar pang, not jealousy exactly, but a deep sadness for what I'd never had. My mother had been gone for 15 years now, taken by cancer when I was 17 and Jane 14. She had been the only one who believed in my business abilities. You have your grandmother's head for numbers, Mom would say, helping me with advanced math homework long before my peers were tackling such concepts. Someday you'll run the whole company and your father will wonder how he ever managed without you. Mom never lived to see how thoroughly Dad had rejected that future. After her death, the distance between us grew even wider. Jane became his sole focus, his princess who could do no wrong. As the minister spoke about love and commitment, I found myself studying the guests. Many were business associates of my father, people I'd known since childhood, but who now barely acknowledged me. Their loyalties had always aligned with Dad's favor. I wondered how many of them knew about the impending sale of Mason Electronics. Harold Winters caught my eye from the fourth row and gave me a small nod. As Dad's business partner, he must know about the Titan Holdings deal. Did he also know I was behind the purchase? His expression revealed nothing. After the ceremony, guests mingled in the church garden while the wedding party took photos. I was trapped in an endless series of poses standing beside bridesmaids. I barely knew all friends of Jane from her social circles. Sophie Mason, is that you? I turned to find David Larson, who had been head of engineering at Mason Electronics before leaving 3 years ago. He had been one of the few who had supported my modernization proposals. David, it's good to see you, I said, genuinely pleased. Where are you working now? Precision Technologies. They brought me on to lead their medical devices division. He lowered his voice. I've been following Titan Holdings with interest. Their integrated systems are exactly what I tried to get your father to develop. My pulse quickened. You know about Titan. Everyone in the industry is talking about them. Impressive innovation pipeline. He studied my face. Word is, they're acquiring Mason Electronics. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated with a text from Max Uargent. Call me. Complications with the deal. Excuse me, David. I need to take this, I said, moving away from the crowd toward a quiet corner of the garden. Max answered on the first ring. We have a problem. Your father is trying to change the terms at the last minute. What? The contracts are signed. He's claiming certain intellectual property was not included in the original agreement. Says it belongs to a separate holding company. My stomach dropped. That's not true. All the IP is owned directly by Mason Electronics. I've seen the paperwork myself. That's what I thought. I'm looking at the documentation he just sent over. It looks like he created this holding company only 3 weeks ago and transferred key patents to it. That can't be legal. It's in a gray area, Max admitted. He did it before signing our final agreement. We could fight it in court, but that would delay the acquisition by months. I glanced across the garden, where Dad was laughing with the father of the groom, champagne glass in hand. This was a calculated move. He was extracting more value while diminishing what I'd actually acquire. "What are our options?" I asked. "We can walk away, renegotiate, or proceed and deal with the IP issues separately." I took a deep breath. "Proceed as planned. I'll handle the IP situation directly." When I rejoined the wedding festivities, I found myself seated beside Tracy, Dad's executive assistant of 20 years. She had always been kind to me, slipping me candy as a child and later providing insights into the company when Dad shut me out of meetings. "Beautiful ceremony," she commented, adjusting her napkin. "Your sister looks happy." "She does," I agreed. "How are things at the office, Tracy? I hear there have been some changes." She glanced around before answering. "People are nervous. Your father's been closed-door meetings for weeks. Rumors about layoffs." She hesitated. "He let the entire software development team go last month. Said it was redundant." "Software team? When did Mason Electronics get a software team?" "About a year ago. Your father hired them after losing the Johnson contract to a competitor with integrated systems." Tracy's expression was pointed. "Exactly what you proposed before you left." So Dad had finally recognized the need for software integration, but too late, and without the proper implementation strategy. Now he was cutting the team to make the books look better for the sale. "What else has changed?" I pressed. Tracy lowered her voice. "He's been removing assets. Expensive equipment disappearing overnight. Records altered. I've been at that company 20 years, Sophie. Something isn't right." A cold feeling settled in my chest. This went beyond Dad's personal rejection of me. He was deliberately devaluing Mason Electronics before the sale, likely planning to start fresh with the assets he'd extracted. As the reception approached, I made my way to the bridal suite to help Jane with her outfit change. I found her alone, switching her cathedral veil for a shorter reception version. "Have you made your decision?" she asked without preamble. "Jane, there's more going on here than you realize. Dad is stripping the company of assets before the sale. He's planning something underhanded." She shrugged, adjusting her earrings in the mirror. "That's business, isn't it? What Dad always says, only the ruthless survive. This isn't ruthlessness, it's potentially fraud. He's hurting the company and the employees." "Not my problem," Jane replied, turning to face me. "Have you decided about my offer?" I studied my sister's face, seeing the hardness there that I'd always tried to ignore. "I'm not giving you half of anything. What you're doing is blackmail." She smiled, unperturbed. "We'll see how that works out for you. Dad's giving a special toast at the reception. Should be interesting." As she brushed past me, I caught her arm. "Wait. What do you know about Dad's plans?" "Enough to know which side to be on," she answered, pulling away. "I'm always on the winning team, Sophie. You should have learned that by now." Left alone in the bridal suite, I opened my clutch purse and removed a folded document I'd discovered while researching Mason Electronics' financial history. It was a copy of my mother's will, specifically the section regarding her 25% ownership stake in the company. According to the will, her shares were to be divided equally between Jane and me upon her death. But when I checked the current ownership records, those shares had somehow all gone to Jane. Looking at the transfer documentation dated 6 months after Mom's death, I noticed something odd. The signature on the document, authorizing the transfer of my portion to Jane, didn't match Mom's handwriting on other legal papers. The implications were staggering. Dad had potentially forged documents to divert my inheritance to Jane. With this realization, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just about Dad favoring Jane or thinking I was incompetent. He had actively, illegally stolen from me years ago. And I finally had the proof. The wedding reception was held at the Grand Plaza Hotel in the heart of downtown. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings and elaborate floral arrangements adorned every table. No expense had been spared for the joining of the Mason and Williams families. I was seated at table 12, far from the head table where Jane Andrew and both sets of parents held court. My table mates were distant cousins and friends of the Williams family people, with no connection to me or Mason Electronics. The message was clear: I was an afterthought, included only because tradition demanded it. Between the salad and main course, I made my way to the bar for a much-needed glass of wine. Standing there was a woman I didn't recognize, mid-20s, wearing a dress that looked straight from a runway and sporting a diamond bracelet that probably cost more than my monthly rent. You must be Sophie, she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. I'm Melanie. I've heard so much about you. Her tone suggested those things hadn't been flattering. I shook her hand anyway. I'm afraid you have the advantage. I don't think we've met. Oh, I'm with your father, she said with a giggle that set my teeth on edge. 6 months now. He's just the most amazing man. My father's girlfriend, of course. She looked younger than me by several years. Fascinating, I replied neutrally. Excuse me, I need to speak with someone. As I turned away, she touched my arm. He told me all about your issues with the company. Such a shame you couldn't cut it in the family business. The calculated dig confirmed this wasn't a chance encounter. Dad had sent his girlfriend to twist the knife. I spotted Paul Richards, Mason Electronics CFO, standing alone by a window. Paul had been with the company for 15 years and had always treated me with professional respect even when Dad dismissed my input. Hello, Paul, I greeted him. How are things at Mason Electronics these days? He glanced around nervously before answering. Challenging. Your father has made some unorthodox decisions lately. Like selling the company without consulting the board. Paul's eyes widened slightly. You know about that. I make it my business to know, I replied carefully. I also know about the equipment that's disappeared, the software team that was hired and fired, and the intellectual property suddenly transferred to a separate holding company. Paul swallowed hard. Sophie, I can't discuss this here. You're right. But hypothetically, if someone were engaged in activities that might constitute shareholder fraud, that person could face serious consequences. Hypothetically, Paul agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. Such activities might include systematically devaluing a company before a sale, with plans to repurchase it at a lower price through a shell corporation owned by a friend. The confirmation of my suspicions sent a jolt through me. And who might this friend be? Paul's gaze shifted to the head table. Thomas Williams, the father of the groom. The pieces fell into place. Dad wasn't just selling the company, he was orchestrating an elaborate scheme with his new in-laws. Sell Mason Electronics to Titan Holdings, strip it of its valuable assets beforehand, then have Thomas Williams buy it back at a fraction of the price once it inevitably struggled without those assets. One more hypothetical question, I said quietly. If someone had documentation suggesting share transfers after my mother's death might have involved forged signatures, would you be surprised? Paul's face drained of color. I always wondered about that transaction. The timing never made sense. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a hotel staff member, Miss Mason. This was delivered for you. He handed me a manila envelope. Inside were the final acquisition documents from Max requiring my signature as Samantha Bennett, CEO of Titan Holdings. A note was paperclipped to the front, sign as soon as possible. Gregory pushing to close deal tonight. I excused myself and found a quiet office down the hall. After reviewing the paperwork, I signed in my Samantha Bennett signature, took photos of each page with my phone and sent them to Max with the message, proceeding as planned. We'll explain my approach later. When I returned to the reception, the toasts were about to begin. Jane and Andrew sat glowing at the head table, surrounded by their wedding party. Dad stood beside Thomas Williams, both men looking pleased with themselves. As I slipped back into my seat, I noticed something I'd missed before. At a small table near the emergency exit sat 3 men in dark suits, quietly observing the proceedings. They weren't wedding guests, their attentive posture and minimal interaction marked them as professionals of some kind. One caught my eye and gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. Max had mentioned hiring security for the confrontation I'd planned, but I'd expected them to wait outside. Their presence inside meant Max believed the situation might escalate. The microphone squealed as Dad tapped it. Testing, he joked, earning polite laughter. I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate my beautiful daughter Jane and her wonderful new husband Andrew. He launched into a speech about family legacy and the joining of 2 prominent business families. I watched the faces around me, wondering how many knew the truth about what was happening behind the wedding facade. While we're all together, I'd like to share some family business news. Dad continued, his voice carrying across the silent room. After 35 years at the helm of Mason Electronics, I've decided it's time for a change. We're selling the company. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many of the guests were employees or had connections to the business. Jane, As a wedding gift, you'll be receiving a significant portion of the proceeds. He smiled at my sister, who beamed back at him. Then his gaze shifted to me, his expression hardening. As for Sophie, who abandoned the family business years ago to pursue her own interests, well, you're getting nothing. The room fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me, witnessing my public humiliation. Jane's smile turned smug. Andrew looked uncomfortable. Thomas Williams whispered something to his wife. I felt a strange calm settle over me. This moment, this cruel, calculated moment, was exactly what I'd prepared for. I laughed, the sound echoing through the shocked silence. Dad frowned, clearly thrown off by my reaction. He'd expected tears, anger, or humiliated silence. My laughter disrupted his script. Something funny, Sophie? He asked, irritation evident in his voice. I took a sip of water, letting the tension build. Just curious, Dad. Who's the buyer? He straightened, pride returning to his posture. Titan Holdings. $38 million. He raised his glass. A fair price for a lifetime of work. I stood slowly, lifting my own glass. The room was utterly silent now, all eyes darting between father and daughter. I am Titan Holdings, I said clearly, my voice carrying without the microphone. The room froze. Dad's glass stopped midway to his mouth. Jane's smug smile vanished. Thomas Williams whispered urgently to Andrew. What did you say? Dad finally managed, his voice suddenly hoarse. I said I am Titan Holdings. I moved toward the center of the room. Or more accurately, I'm Samantha Bennett, founder and CEO of Titan Holdings, the company that just purchased Mason Electronics. The silence that followed my announcement was absolute. For several seconds, no one moved, as if the entire reception had been frozen in time. Then, Dad's expression transformed from shock to fury. That's impossible, he spluttered, his face flushing deep red. You're lying. I reached into my clutch and removed the acquisition papers I'd just signed. It's done, Dad. The contracts are executed. Mason Electronics belongs to Titan Holdings. I paused, holding his gaze. To me? Jane stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her champagne. You can't do this. This is my wedding. Yes, it is, I agreed calmly. And I'm sorry for the disruption. But since Dad chose this moment to announce the company's sale and publicly disinherit me, I thought it only fair to complete the picture. Thomas Williams stepped forward, his lawyer's instincts clearly activated. Gregory, we should discuss this privately. Dad ignored him, his eyes never leaving my face. This is some kind of trick. You don't have that kind of money. No trick, I replied. I built Titan Holdings from scratch 3 years ago. We're now valued at $45 million. I allowed myself a small smile. Turns out those software nonsense innovations you rejected were quite profitable. Dad's face went from red to ashen. Whispers spread through the crowd as guests processed the unfolding drama. Some looked shocked. Others seemed almost impressed. You've been planning this all along, Dad said, his voice dangerously quiet. Worming your way into my business under a fake name. I made a straightforward business offer through proper channels. You accepted. That's not worming, that's commerce. I stepped closer. And let's be honest, I learned everything about ruthless business tactics from watching you. Dad slammed his glass down on the table, champagne sloshing over the sides. Everyone out, he shouted. This reception is on hold. Family emergency. Confused guests looked at each other, uncertain what to do. Jane burst into tears while Andrew awkwardly patted her shoulder. The wedding planner rushed forward, trying to maintain order as Dad stormed toward the exit, beckoning me to follow. As I moved to leave the ballroom, I caught Jane's eye. The mixture of shock and hatred in her expression was unmistakable. I hadn't just ruined her perfect wedding day. I'd shattered her expectation of financial windfall. Dad led me to a small conference room down the hall. As soon as the door closed behind us, he whirled on me. You manipulative little snake, he hissed. You've been planning this revenge fantasy for years. This isn't about revenge, I countered. It's about saving a company you've been systematically destroying. My company built with my hands, my ideas, my sacrifices. And what about Mom's sacrifices, I shot back. Her 25% stake that mysteriously all went to Jane after her death? Dad's expression flickered briefly before hardening again. Your mother wanted Jane to have those shares. She knew you'd never be satisfied with the company as it was. That's a lie. I pulled out the copied document I'd found. This is Mom's will. She left her shares equally to Jane and me, but somehow all those shares ended up with Jane. Care to explain the discrepancy? Dad glanced at the paper but didn't take it. Ancient history. Irrelevant now. Not to the SEC or the district attorney. Forgery and fraud have no statute of limitations in cases like this. For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed his face. You wouldn't dare bring the authorities into family business. Try me. I leaned against the conference table. I also know about the equipment you've been removing from the company, the intellectual property you transferred 3 weeks ago, your plan with Thomas Williams to buy back the devalued company after I've taken the shell you left behind. Dad's eyes widened slightly. You have no proof. I have more than you think. Financial records, witness statements, documentation of every step you've taken to undermine the company before the sale. I shook my head. Why, Dad? Why go to such lengths to keep me away from Mason Electronics? I only ever wanted to help the company succeed. Because you're not a true Mason. He exploded, his composure finally shattering. You've never been worthy of the Mason name or legacy. The vehemence of his words staggered me. What are you talking about? I'm your daughter. Dad gave a bitter laugh. Your mother and I were separated for a time before you were born. She came back pregnant. I accepted you as mine to save the marriage, but I've always known the truth. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. That's not true, I whispered. Look in the mirror, Sophie. You look nothing like me or Jane. You've never belonged in this family. I gave you the Mason name, but you were never worthy of the company. I stared at him, seeing decades of resentment and bitterness etched into his face. This wasn't a recent development or a reaction to my business decisions. This was the root of it all, a festering doubt that had poisoned our relationship from the beginning. You're wrong, I said, finally, my voice steadier than I expected, and I can prove it. I returned to the reception hall to find chaos. Guests clustered in small groups, whispering intensely. Jane was sobbing dramatically in a corner, while Andrew and his parents engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. The 3 security professionals Max had hired stood unobtrusively by the doors, watching everything. Melanie, Dad's girlfriend, intercepted me as I entered. What have you done? She demanded. Gregory is devastated. I think devastated is an overstatement, I replied. Furious is more accurate. You've destroyed your family for what a business. She looked genuinely perplexed. Was it worth it? Before I could answer, Jane stormed over her mascara, running down her cheeks. You ruined everything, she shouted, drawing all eyes to us. My wedding day, the company sale, everything. I didn't start this, Jane, I said quietly. Dad did when he decided to use your wedding as cover for his schemes. What schemes? She demanded. He was just selling a struggling company. A company he deliberately made to struggle, I corrected. Did you know about the asset stripping, the intellectual property transfer, his plan with Thomas Williams? Jane's hesitation told me everything. That was just smart business, she said, less confident now. It was fraud, I stated flatly. And I have proof. Andrew approached cautiously. Jane, we should continue this discussion privately. There's nothing to discuss, Jane snapped. My sister just destroyed our family on our wedding day. I turned to address Andrew directly. Your father was part of a scheme to defraud Titan Holdings, my company. I have documentation to prove it. Andrew paled slightly. As a junior partner at his father's law firm, he would understand the implications. What kind of documentation? Financial records. Witness statements. Communications between your father and mine discussing their plan to strip Mason Electronics of assets. Sell it to me, then buy it back at a fraction of the price. That's business, Thomas Williams interjected suddenly beside us. Nothing illegal about strategic acquisitions. Except when they involve deliberate misrepresentation and securities fraud, I countered. The SEC takes a dim view of such strategies, Mr. Williams. The crowd around us had grown. Among them were several Mason Electronics employees who looked troubled by the revelations. Is it true? Sophie asked David Larson, the former head of engineering. Has Gregory been dismantling the company? Yes, I confirmed. The software team you always advocated for was finally hired, then fired right before the sale. Equipment has been disappearing, patents transferred to shell companies. Murmurs of concern spread through the group. These weren't just wedding guests. They were people whose livelihoods depended on Mason Electronics. "What happens now?" asked Tracy, Dad's assistant. "Will there be more layoffs under Titan Holdings?" "No," I assured her. "My plan is to rebuild and expand, not downsize. The integration of hardware and software that Mason Electronics needs is exactly what Titan Holdings specializes in." "You expect us to believe you bought the company out of the goodness of your heart," Jane scoffed. "I bought it because I believe in its potential. Because 73 families depend on it for their livelihoods. And yes, because it's my heritage too, regardless of what Dad thinks." Jane's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means Dad just told me he believes I'm not his biological daughter. That's his excuse for 32 years of emotional neglect." Gasps and uncomfortable shuffling spread through the crowd. Jane looked genuinely shocked. "He said that, yes, but he's wrong." I reached into my clutch once more and removed a folded paper. "This is a DNA test I had done 5 years ago. I was tired of the way Dad always treated me differently, always made me feel like an outsider. I needed to know the truth." I handed the paper to Jane. "I am Gregory Mason's biological daughter. 100% certainty. I've known for years, but kept it to myself because I wanted to earn his respect based on my abilities, not biology." Jane stared at the document, then back at me. For the first time, her expression held something other than anger or competitiveness, perhaps a glimmer of compassion. "He really told you that you weren't his?" I nodded. "Just now. Apparently, it's what he's believed all these years." "That explains so much," she whispered almost to herself. "None of this matters," Thomas Williams interrupted. "The fact remains, Sophie, that you've acquired Mason Electronics under false pretenses. We'll challenge this in court." "You're welcome to try," I replied calmly. "But given the evidence I have of your involvement in Gregory's fraud, I wouldn't recommend it. Your firm's reputation might not survive the publicity." The color drained from his face. "You're bluffing." "Max," I called out. Max Thompson stepped forward from where he'd been observing near the back of the room. "Miss Mason has extensive documentation, Mr. Williams. I've reviewed it personally. I would strongly advise against litigation." Thomas Williams exchanged a look with his son. Andrew gave a slight shake of his head, a lawyer recognizing a losing position. The doors to the reception hall burst open as Dad returned, his face a mask of fury. He stopped short at the sight of the gathered crowd. "What is this tribunal?" he demanded. "No, Gregory," I replied. "Just transparency. Something Mason Electronics has been lacking lately." Dad's gaze swept the room, noting the employees, business associates, and friends who were watching him with new awareness. Whatever he had planned to say died on his lips. "I have made legal mistakes," I conceded, addressing the room. "Using a pseudonym in business dealings isn't ideal. I'll answer for that if necessary. But I stand by my decision to acquire Mason Electronics. My plan is to revitalize the company, reinvest in innovation, and secure every existing job." I turned to Dad. "Including yours if you want it." Dad stared at me, momentarily speechless. "You think I'd work for you? My own daughter? Why not? I'm qualified. I'm capable. And I'm definitely your daughter." I held up the DNA test results. I've had proof for years. The weight of this revelation seemed to hit him physically. He swayed slightly, reaching for the back of a chair to steady himself. "That's impossible," he muttered. "Your mother," she admitted. "Mom would never have lied about something so important," I said firmly. "Whatever she told you, you misunderstood." The room had fallen silent again, witnesses to the unraveling of decades of family mythology. Jane stood frozen, the DNA results still clutched in her hand. Andrew watched his father-in-law with new wariness. The Mason Electronics employees exchanged glances, clearly reassessing their understanding of the company's past and future. "So what happens now?" Tracy finally asked, breaking the silence. I surveyed the room, aware of the responsibility I'd taken on, not just for a business, but for lives and livelihoods. Now I said we rebuild. 1 week after Jane's wedding, I sat in what had once been my father's office at Mason Electronics headquarters. The nameplate on the door now read Sophie Mason, CEO. The massive mahogany desk remained, but I'd removed the hunting trophies and replaced them with modern art and plants. Light streamed through windows that had previously been covered by heavy drapes. The acquisition had made headlines in business publications. Titan Holdings acquires, Mason Electronics founder's daughter revealed as mystery buyer. Industry analysts debated whether I'd pulled off a brilliant strategic move or committed corporate suicide. Only time would tell. My first order of business had been to halt the asset stripping and recover what had been removed. Most of the equipment was found in a warehouse owned by a shell company connected to Thomas Williams. With Max's help, we'd crafted legal documentation that gave Williams a choice: return everything voluntarily or face charges. He chose the former. The intellectual property my father had transferred proved more complicated. We eventually negotiated a licensing arrangement that brought the patents back under Mason Electronics' control without the public embarrassment of legal proceedings. I spent my first week meeting with every department, learning names, listening to concerns. The employees were understandably wary. Many had witnessed the wedding confrontation either directly or through second-hand accounts. They didn't know whether to view me as a savior or a hostile takeover artist. I'm neither, I told them in an all-hands meeting. I'm someone who believes this company has a future, but only if we evolve. The integration of hardware and software that I proposed 3 years ago is now our path forward. By Friday, I'd rehired 4 of the software engineers my father had dismissed and set up interviews with a dozen more. I'd also approved overtime pay for the production team to fulfill backlogged orders that had been deliberately delayed during my father's sabotage efforts. Tracy knocked on my office door just after lunch. "Your sister is here to see you." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Send her in." Jane entered cautiously, looking very different from the confident bride of a week ago. Her designer outfit had been replaced with jeans and a simple blouse. Her eyes held a wariness I hadn't seen before. "Nice office," she commented, glancing around. "You wasted no time making changes." "Some were overdue," I replied. "Have a seat." She perched on the edge of a chair, her posture tense. "I suppose you're wondering why I'm here. I have some guesses." "How was the honeymoon?" Jane's laugh held no humor. "Cancelled. Andrew's father insisted they needed to reassess the situation before proceeding with business as usual." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" she challenged. "You destroyed my wedding, Sophie. Humiliated me in front of everyone we know." I leaned back in my chair, considering her. "That wasn't my intention. Dad forced my hand by making his announcement at your reception. You could have waited." Confronted him privately later. "And let him complete the asset stripping. Let him and Thomas Williams defraud my company." I shook my head. "This wasn't about upstaging your wedding, Jane. It was about stopping illegal activity that would have hurt dozens of families." She was quiet for a moment, picking at a loose thread on her purse. "Dad's not doing well. He's drinking a lot. Melanie left him." "I'm sorry to hear that, too. And I was, despite everything. I offered him a position here, Vice President of Legacy Accounts. He'd keep his office, his salary, his dignity. He refused." "Of course he did. His pride wouldn't allow it." "Pride is expensive," I observed. "What about you, Jane? What brings you here today?" She met my eyes directly for the first time. "Money. I need money, Sophie." I figured. "What happened to your share of the company sale?" Jane looked away. "Most of it went to Dad's debts. He had gambling issues I didn't know about. The rest is tied up in the house and other assets that will take time to liquidate. And you need cash now." She nodded, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. "Andrew's parents have basically cut us off. They're blaming me for not knowing about Dad's schemes." "Did you know?" I asked quietly. "About the fraud?" Jane hesitated. "Not the details. I knew he was planning something that wouldn't look good if examined too closely. I chose not to examine it." Her honesty was refreshing if overdue. "So now you want me to bail you out?" "I want what should have been mine anyway," she corrected. "Half of Mom's shares. The shares Dad illegally gave to you and that I legally purchased along with the rest of the company." I smiled slightly. "You have some nerve, Jane." "I'm your sister," she said simply. I studied her for a long moment. The Jane before me wasn't the smugly superior bride of a week ago. She seemed smaller somehow, more vulnerable. For For the first time in our adult lives, the power dynamic had completely reversed. "I have a proposal," I said finally, "not a handout." She straightened, immediately suspicious. "What kind of proposal?" "A job. Here at Mason Electronics." Jane blinked in surprise. "Doing what I don't know anything about circuit boards or software." "No, but you have a degree in marketing and extensive social connections. We need someone to head our new client relations department. Someone who understands high-end customers and can speak their language." "You're offering me a real job, with responsibilities. With the salary benefits and performance-based bonuses I confirmed. You'd report to me, of course, but have considerable autonomy in building your team and strategy." Jane looked bewildered. "Why would you do this? After everything that's happened?" I considered my answer carefully. "Because despite it all, you're family. Because Mom would have wanted us to find a way forward together. And because, frankly, you're qualified for the position." She stared at me, searching my face for signs of a trap or trick. Finding none, she asked, "And if I refuse? If I'd rather have a cash settlement?" "Then we part ways here. No settlement, no ongoing relationship. My legal team will address any claims you might bring regarding Mom's shares, but I think we both know how that would end." Jane was quiet for a long time, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. "When do I start?" "Monday, 8 a.m. HR will have your paperwork ready." She stood to leave, then paused. "Sophie, the DNA test. Did you ever tell Dad about it before the wedding?" "No. I kept hoping he'd accept me without it. That my work, my abilities would be enough." Jane nodded slowly. "I always envied you, you know. Your intelligence, your focus. Even when Dad favored me, I knew you were the one with real potential." Her admission stunned me. I had no idea. "Of course not. I couldn't let you see it." She managed a small, genuine smile. "See you Monday, boss." After Jane left, I walked to the window overlooking the manufacturing floor. Workers moved efficiently between stations, assembling the circuit boards that had been Mason Electronics' bread and butter for decades. Soon, they'd be integrating those boards with the software interfaces my team at Titan Holdings had perfected. My phone buzzed with a message from Max court documents ready regarding the forged signatures on your mother's will. "Ready to proceed when you are." I typed back, "Hold for now. Family situation evolving." That evening, I drove to my father's house, the house where I'd grown up. It stood dark and imposing in the fading light, the lawn uncut newspapers piled on the porch. I knocked and waited, not sure if he would answer. When he finally opened the door, I barely recognized him. In 1 week, he seemed to have aged years. His hair was unkempt, his clothes rumpled. "Come to gloat?" he asked, his voice rough. "No." "May I come in?" He stepped back wordlessly. The house smelled of stale food and alcohol. In the living room, papers and empty glasses covered every surface. "Jane came to see me today," I said. "I offered her a job at Mason Electronics." "Playing Lady Bountiful with my company," he muttered. "Our company now," I corrected gently. "And she accepted the position." Dad sank into his armchair, suddenly looking exhausted. "What do you want from me, Sophie?" I sat across from him in the same spot where I'd sat countless times growing up, always seeking his approval, always falling short. "I want you to understand something. The DNA test I showed Jane, I got it done 5 years ago after you told me for the 100th time that I wasn't a true Mason. I needed to know if there was any truth to what you implied." He wouldn't meet my eyes. And you are definitely my biological father. 100% certainty." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "That's impossible," your mother admitted. Mom never admitted anything of the kind, I cut in firmly. "Whatever she said, you twisted it to fit what you wanted to believe. You needed a reason to justify how you treated me, so you invented one." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 32 years of misunderstanding hanging between us. "The offer to join Mason Electronics still stands," I said eventually. "Vice President of Legacy Accounts. Your office, your parking space. A chance to be part of what we're building. Under your leadership," he said the words clearly difficult to speak. "Yes, under my leadership." I stood to leave. "The offer expires in 2 weeks. After that, we move forward without you." At the door, I paused. "One more thing, Dad. I'm changing the company name." As of next quarter will be Mason Bennett Electronics. Mom's maiden name deserves to be recognized too. 3 months later, I stood at a podium in the newly renovated Mason Bennett Electronics lobby, addressing a crowd of employees, business partners, and press. Behind me hung a portrait of my mother, her kind eyes and determined expression captured perfectly by the artist. When my mother, Helen Bennett Mason, passed away 15 years ago, she left behind more than shares in a company, I told the assembled crowd. She left a legacy of integrity, innovation, and inclusion. Today, we honor that legacy by dedicating this building in her name. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic. In the front row sat Jane, who had surprised everyone, especially me, with her talent for client relations. Beside her was Dad, still uncomfortable in his role as VP, but gradually adapting. He'd been sober for 60 days and was rebuilding relationships with long-term clients who respected his industry knowledge. After the ceremony, I met with a group of young women from local colleges who had been invited to tour our facilities. Part of our new direction included a mentorship program for women in STEM fields. "What's the most important lesson you've learned?" As a CEO, one student asked. I considered the question carefully. That your worth isn't determined by others' perceptions. That sometimes fighting back against injustice means standing alone, at least at first. And that creating your own path is always more satisfying than following someone else's expectations. As the students departed, I returned to my office, no longer my father's office with my nameplates, but truly mine, redesigned to reflect my vision for the company. On my desk sat a small framed photo of Mom and me when I was about 10, both of us laughing as we built a circuit board together on a kitchen table. The journey from that kitchen table to the CEO's office hadn't been what I expected. It had been harder, more painful, and ultimately more rewarding than I could have imagined. I had fought for my place, not just in the company, but in my own family. I had faced betrayal, deception, and rejection, but emerged stronger for having confronted them directly. As I looked out over the manufacturing floor, now bustling with both hardware engineers and software developers working side by side, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond professional achievement. I had transformed not just a company, but relationships that had seemed beyond repair. The intercom buzzed. "Miss Mason, your 3 o'clock is here." "Send them in," I replied, turning to greet my next appointment with the confidence of someone who finally knew her true worth. What would you do if someone in your family tried to cut you out of your rightful inheritance? Would you fight back like Sophie did, or would you handle it differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might enjoy it too. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving others wrong, but proving yourself right.